All right, welcome. I am Patricia Harold, President of the Nebraska Firearm Owners Association, and we are Nebraskans' voice on Second Amendment issues, followed by almost 30,000 Nebraskans who strongly believe in the rights and freedoms protected by the Second Amendment. We have invited candidates running for Congress, governor, the legislature, city councils, and county sheriff to participate in our online town hall series, Meet the Candidates. Our format for this event is online recorded interview, and each recording is unedited. Our members have prepared questions to assess candidates running for elected office, and I'd like to introduce Schuyler Windham, who is running for the state legislature in District 2. Welcome, Schuyler. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. We'll go ahead and get started. The first question that our members wanted to ask is, why did you agree to participate in this online town hall with NFOA?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a lot of gun advocacy groups at the national level, for instance, but I think it's really important to get to that grassroots connection, and NFOA is the leader in that area. I think you guys do a great job getting advocacy efforts out and working at the state level for Second Amendment rights and firearm training and everything like that. So I'm just really humbled and honored to be able to speak with you today and for you to get the message out there about candidates such as myself who care about the Second Amendment. So
Wonderful.
That's why I'm here.
Great. So our next question is a fun question. What is your favorite firearm and how often do you shoot it?
Yeah. So Trish, you know me a little bit better. So I kind of came into Second Amendment advocacy from the left. I was raised in a Democrat household, and my mom was kind of scared of guns growing up. And my dad had some hunting rifles and that kind of thing, but it wasn't a thing. And so my husband and I got engaged in Second Amendment rights and bought our first gun in 2020. So it's still a bit new, but I will say that I have a Smith & Wesson M&P Shield as a pistol.
Excellent choice.
That I want to get a little bit more familiar with and train much more with. And then we also have a PC carbine. It's actually a 9mm rifle. Yeah. It's really fun to shoot. And obviously, 9mm is a good type of ammo to have with a rifle. So
definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
But I'm really looking forward to, getting more guns and testing out different guns so I can find the right fit for me and experiment. And
sounds great.
Yeah.
All right. So the next question, now we're getting into the heart of the matter. In your opinion, what is the number one purpose of government?
I think this is a really important question and one that a lot of folks don't ask to begin with. So I think it's really important that NFOA is addressing this issue. I actually went to Nebraska College of Law. I'm a lawyer by trade. And I studied a lot of the founders' writing and what was important to them and why the Second Amendment exists and why government exists in the first place. And I think that sentiment has really been lost over the decades. And the big thing that they really wanted to do when they established the United States government is that government was there to protect our inherent liberties, and particularly property rights was the big one. And that extends to the person, self-ownership, for instance. So not just that like a firearm is personal property or your home is your property, but your own person, you own your life. And so the government was there to ensure that your rights were not being violated by other people. So if someone assaulted you or stole your property or things like of that nature, that's what government was founded to protect, those inherent property rights that we have. Unfortunately, and there were a lot of restraints on Congress of what they could and could not do, and a lot of the powers were reserved to the people in order to be self-empowered, and the idea of rules but no rulers And we've come a long way from that now today. Unfortunately, the courts, like as I was studying this in law school, really deviated from the text of the Constitution and the constraints, and the founding fathers were very explicit about what they meant, and they thought that it was obvious. Unfortunately, that's not what government is doing anymore, and I'd like to get back to that principle and that idea that government is supposed to be there to help you, not hurt you. Unfortunately, a lot of folks, they feel like their firearm rights are under threat, and they're being taxed half to death, and the list continues. Sure. There seems to be a lot more about government is infringing on people's rights rather than.
So then that's a perfect segue to the next question. Then when we think about your role, in the state capitol as a senator, what are you going to do to protect Nebraskans from federal government attempts to restrict the Second Amendment?
Yeah, so there's a few things that we can do, and I want to be a leader on that in the unicameral, and that includes being a Second Amendment sanctuary state. It includes not necessarily cooperating with, like the ATF. ATF is a really horrible bureaucracy with the federal government that strips people's rights from them. So there are some protections that we can enact at the state level to protect people at the federal level, and we can also continue to defend people's Second Amendment rights being taken from them at the state level and the local level too. I hear a lot from folks in Omaha and Lincoln who are really suffering. I'm out of Lincoln myself, and the cities tend to like to pass certain restrictions and that kind of thing. And I think it is up to the state government to protect people's rights and step in and make sure that cities aren't infringing on people's rights either. I want more freedom, not less freedom.
Right. Yeah. So now that we've talked about that, we've been, looking at some very specific issues in Nebraska lately. And so we're going to frame the next series of questions on what is your position on the given topic, and given that you haven't served yet, what will you do in support of that position? So what is your current position on the idea of constitutional carry, and what would you do to support that position?
Yeah, so that goes with what I was saying about the state and upholding people's inherent rights, and with the Second Amendment. Constitutional carry is an obvious law. I think it should never have come to the point where there was a concealed carry license in the first place, is what I'm saying.
Got it.
I think Senator Brewer was really awesome in bringing the constitutional carry legislation. It was a big initiative, but it also had a lot of compromises in it, and so it was really close. I think that we can continue to work on that and get something like that passed, but even once we get that passed, there's a lot more to be done after that, so we kind of need to work in layers. But that first push of getting constitutional carry is really important, and then after that we can start talking about, well, what were those initial restrictions with the concealed carry laws that are still being preserved with that constitutional carry bill, at least as it was written, to try to get it passed. Yeah.
All right. Our next topic has to do with red flag laws, and what's your position on those, and how would you support that position?
Yeah, so coming from the left, I knew a lot of folks that they just didn't know very much about firearms, and they don't know that much about the consequences of certain policies and actions. And that way I think that a lot of people are well-intended when they are anti-gun legislation, but they don't quite understand what it is and why they're legislating certain things. So with red flag laws, they really think that they're trying to help people, but they don't understand how those types of policies can actually hurt people and be used against somebody. For instance, a family member who just doesn't like that their family member has weapons And so they go and say, oh yeah, they have a mental health issue, and they're going to confiscate those weapons. And in my opinion, that also violates due process. There's no due process behind that. And that's a big problem. But even things like mental health issues, where again, my sister-in-law, she had PTSD from a domestic abuse situation. So if somebody was going to say, well, she can't have a firearm because she has PTSD, and her PTSD might not actually really, inhibit her ability to own a firearm, but her ex is out there and he's violent and abusive and he's trying to track her down.
Right.
And it was a really, it was a heart-wrenching moment when I saw her go bag, and I saw her pistol and her just everything that she had packed in there in case she and her son needed to escape. And I don't think a lot of people who have not been in a life-threatening situation like that really understand what it means to put those barriers in front of people who need it most. And you can get to Second Amendment rights logically, but there's also an emotional aspect. And if you were raised in a very safe neighborhood and you didn't have to deal with issues like that, it could be easy to say, yeah, take someone's firearm from them. But I know better now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That is a very, very good example of why we're against them. So, so as one of the few states in the nation without it, let's discuss your thoughts on state preemption of firearm laws. And what do you think about it? And what would you do to support that position?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned like Omaha and Lincoln have certain firearm laws, and even in this last constitutional carry bill, there were certain compromises that would carve them out. But the reality is that it not only does it infringe on people's rights to have certain jurisdictions like Omaha having registries and that kind of thing, it's also very confusing, and practically it's very difficult. Like if you have your concealed carry permit and you are from Iowa, or you're driving through I-80 into Omaha and you don't realize, certain restrictions are in place, or you're supposed to do, it can cause a lot of problems. I've worked with Dick Clark, who is a firearms attorney, and he has a lot of cases of people being arrested in Omaha for violating Omaha restrictions, and has helped people walk through those issues. So really what preemption does is it makes sure that everybody knows what the rules are, and you don't accidentally drive through a certain city or town and then inadvertently violate the law,
Right.
Which we don't want people to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I hear all the time people are driving through Illinois, and of course there are federal laws and there are state laws, but they don't realize that you have to store your firearm a different way when you're driving through Illinois versus any other state.
Yeah.
And and then there's things like magazine limits in Colorado. You don't want there to be too much variability when it comes to the cities and townships, because people can get in trouble for not even realizing that they violated the law. And of course, ignorance of the law is not,
an excuse, right?
It's not an excuse, but it's kind of impossible for people to navigate that situation.
Right.
They don't, if they're not from the area.
We don't care for what we call gotcha laws. They're really, they don't serve a very good purpose. So.
Yeah, or trumped up charges and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like if you defend yourself but you fired in city limits, so whoops, now you have a misdemeanor.
Right. Yeah.
It's not good.
Well, talking about that, let's talk about some recently needed protections. We were on the verge of a better version of Castle Doctrine with LB 300. What are your thoughts on Castle Doctrine, and what would you do in support of that position?
Yeah, can you just remind me what LB 300 was going to do with our Castle Doctrine position?
We in Nebraska have sort of a Castle Doctrine light, meaning everywhere else you have a duty to retreat. So if I'm out on the sidewalk, if I'm downtown, there's a duty to retreat as long as I'm safe if I can be safe doing so, which you're making that decision in split seconds. So in your home, if you're within the physical location of your home, within the walls, you don't have a duty to retreat. So you could stand at the top of your stairs and like protect your family in the hallway and not have to run down the hallway and hide. However, there is no presumption of innocence. You still have to, basically meet a higher level of justification, if you will, when true castle doctrine says, I'm in my home, it is my castle, it is a place I'm supposed to be safest, and I should be able to stand lawfully and not retreat if in fact I'm facing a threat of deadly force or serious bodily harm in my home. So the castle doctrine bill that she would have was going to give you the presumption of innocence, right? So the state would have to prove you did something wrong rather than you proving you did right. And it would extend it to your vehicle, right? So you wouldn't have a duty to retreat in your vehicle. And it would clarify the fact that in your workplace, we have no duty to retreat if it's a stranger, but we have a duty to retreat if it's a coworker, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was what her clarification bill with 300 was going to do.
I agree completely with that. I was aware that we had a castle doctrine for the home and the workplace, but that presumption of innocence is really important piece that I was a little confused on. And I also thought that it was weird that it's okay. I mean, you don't have a duty to retreat if it's a stranger, but a coworker that decides to do something.
Right.
And
Because
it's
we
like,
all understand workplace violence, those are coworkers.
right. And of course, in that moment, I think that one with the vehicle too, a lot of people don't realize it's like, if someone is attacking you in your vehicle, you don't really have anywhere to go anyway.
Right.
There's, I mean, come on, effectively, you're trapped. And I think that's really a frustrating part of the law as it currently stands. But I think what you alluded to before too is like you have just seconds. Your life is being threatened. How are you supposed to prove? I mean, really, that's what our attorneys are there. But then you have to go to court and you have to prove to a jury and say like, a reasonable person, I did what I had to do. I couldn't retreat. It's like now you're put in that position where,
right. The
you're
burden
paying
is on you as the innocent
$100,000
homeowner rather than the criminal that entered your home.
Exactly. You're going to pay $100,000 in legal fees to try to prove your innocence. Exactly. And
so do you feel the same way about sort of the stand your ground? So stand your ground kind of has a bad reputation because it seems like vigilantism, like, I just can't wait for something to happen. But really stand your ground is, I have a lawful reason to be here and I have a lawful reason to stay and I should not have to depart. So the duty to retreat part with stand your ground is really, those are the polar opposites. So I think we've answered that question in the thoroughness that you answered the castle doctrine. So great job on that.
Yeah.
Specific gun laws that you think should be repealed, or do any come to mind?
Yeah, so basically everything that we've talked about here, and specifically there are certain restrictions with the concealed carry laws as they stand. Those are kind of the extra components that we can dig deeper on that don't make any sense.
Got it.
Like, for instance, you can open carry with alcohol in your system. A little bit of, like, if you went for a drink, you can legally, in the state of Nebraska, you could have a drink and be open carrying, but you can't conceal carry.
Right.
And to me, I'm just like, it doesn't make sense. And so some of those things just need to be fixed.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
So NFOA, we believe in education. So we're legislation and we're educationally minded. What's your ideas about having like firearm safety classes within K through 12 public schools? Not pro-gun, not anti-gun, just gun safety, so people can be educated. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think that kids should be educated in safety protocols across many different subjects. I'm trying to remember back in my elementary school days, but I think that we had like uh, some safety training, like don't eat batteries and don't stick forks into outlets. Like there were worksheets that we did where it's like common sense safety things. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And not all households, like my household, my dad just said, don't touch the gun, right?
Mhm.
If you ever find it, like he hid it and, said, don't touch it.
Yeah.
And, not all households are going to teach children what they should or should not do in certain situations. And, certain households, I mean, we do see situations where kids get a hold of guns, like the parents weren't taking care of them. And then, of course, certain people try to use that as the impetus to push certain legislation and that kind of thing. But I think that education is really important to helping families and children be safer and but still have that firearm accessible in a self-defense situation, because that's the other
Fantastic.
piece that they don't really understand. But yeah, I think education is great, and I'd love to see you all doing some safety courses for children, whether it's in public or private education spheres.
Great. So being a 2A supporter, what is your position or what's your thoughts on the intent and purpose of the Second Amendment? I think that ties in to your beginning statement about the purpose of government.
Yeah, so the founders were very clear about the intent of the Second Amendment. And as you're probably well aware, and a lot of listeners are, the Bill of Rights kind of came a little bit after the Constitution. They kind of thought it was a given. Some of these things were very obvious to them, but I'm glad that they wrote them down and actually embodied them in a Bill of Rights, because
Yeah, no kidding.
we would be in a very different position if they hadn't done that. And hindsight's always 2020. So there's some things that I wish that, but they couldn't have known what the future was going to bring. But the Second Amendment was really important to them specifically because they were establishing a new system of government, and the government that they were seceding from didn't want them to have firearms. Because they knew that obviously people rebelling and forming a new system of government, that those firearms were very critical in preserving life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, property rights, the dream of what they were trying to do. It was about self-determination, and firearms are really just a check on power. It's obviously a way for the individual to have self-defense, property ownership of something that could save your life, but an extension of that inherent right to life and freedom. Without firearms, you can't. There's no insurance. There's no insurance of your life and your liberty, and then what are you fighting for? That's going back to give me life or give me liberty, right, or give me death. Yeah. It's like if you have life but no liberty, that's not really a life. And so that's really the foundation of the Second Amendment is, and to them it was to make sure that everybody had firearms and was well trained. And there is some legislation that came after that can kind of give that context, and their writings were about making sure that the term regulation in the Second Amendment, a lot of people like to bring that up because it doesn't mean it regulated. Didn't mean what it meant. Like right, regulated, yeah, back then meant that people were well prepared or well trained. So basically what you all are doing, you're making sure that the militia, the people, that's what the right is an individual right for people, is to be well regulated, i.e. well trained, in case they needed to step up and preserve the freedom of the country, yeah, from enemies, foreign or abroad. So that's what the Second Amendment means. Just that's the truth of the matter. So anybody trying to say otherwise, they have different intents, or they don't care about the actual history and context and words of the Constitution.
So I think that, again, another perfect segue. So lastly, let's move on to the Nebraska Constitution.
Yeah.
Article 1, Section 1 is near and dear to my heart, and it is for many. And when you read it, you just really realize how smart Nebraskans were at the time that they did the work to get it on the ballot to amend the Constitution to make it perfectly clear where we stood as a state in regards to Second Amendment rights. Like we really spelled it out. So how do you think that will impact your decision making in the role you're pursuing?
Honestly, I think that it's even stronger in some ways than the federal Constitution. It really outlines what that right is that we're preserving with the state constitution. And when I went through my hunter safety training course, I didn't give the instructor any hell about this, but because he was like, well, you don't have a right to do this or whatever with hunting. And I was like, actually, the state constitution says that hunting is a guaranteed right and it's protected. So maybe there shouldn't be any licensure around that.
Right.
I mean, we got to work together and make sure that our wildlife is secure and everything. But I thought it was a little funny. I'm like, no, our state constitution actually, it recognizes your right to procure food with your firearm, which again, the founders thought was obvious. So why were they going to write that down? But I think it was really important that the state constitution does
really
that.
Emphasize that. Wonderful. Well, Schuyler, thank you so much for your time in joining us today. Really appreciate you engaging with the members of NFOA. If folks are interested in learning more about you and your campaign, how can they reach out and find out more information?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is schuylerfornebraska.com. That's SCHUYLERFOR for Nebraska.com. You can get more information about my platform and whatnot on the website. And I also have a Facebook page, same handle, and Twitter I don't use very much, but it's at Schuyler Wind. Because Twitter is
short.
It's not a very good platform in my opinion, but so I have Facebook, I've got the website, I have an email address on my website for anybody in LD2 or anybody who has any questions. Please feel free to reach out to me there. I answer that email personally, so if you ever have any questions or anything like that, that's where you can communicate with me.
Wonderful. Well, Schuyler, thank you again, and we'll go ahead and end our interview for this evening.